In our final session, we shift from the broader conversation about the various manifestations of systemic racism and the appropriate responses to it to a more personal reflection that we hope will resonate with you and challenge you to think about next steps and how you can be a part of the solution as you function in all the spaces that you inhabit. Our speaker this afternoon is Mr. Frederick Day. Fred is a senior vice president within the Brookfield Infrastructure Group, where he primarily focuses on deal execution, financings, portfolio management, and other related matters. Prior to joining Brookfield, Fred practiced law at Skadden, where he focused on mergers and acquisitions, corporate finance, and private equity transactions. Fred graduated summa cum laude from the University of Houston with a degree in finance. He graduated magna cum laude from Southern Methodist University Dedman School of Law, and he holds a Master of Business Administration from IE Business School with a concentration in corporate finance. Good afternoon, Fred. I will now turn the webinar over to you.
Thank you, Eric, and again, appreciate the invitation to speak in the series. And I do think, kind of given the current climate, these are some issues that we definitely need to be focused on. And as you can imagine, we're all aware of the current conversation on lack of diversity in corporate America, and in particular in the legal industry, but also just across the board. And as these conversations started to occur, I did think about, as we all did, like, how do we solve some of these issues? And it did kind of prompt me to reassess my own path to figure out, well, if obviously there's some issues in corporate America from a diversity perspective, like, how did I get to where I'm at, given the obstacles that we're all clearly aware of. So I do hope to share my story today, and I think as we kind of go through the steps that I went through in my life to get to where I'm at, I do think we can identify some key dynamics that will obviously help us identify some of the issues and the problem, but also help us find some good solutions to these problems. So I think, as I thought through my path, two kind of fundamental conclusions that I reached were, one, I do agree that we do need systematic and direct solutions at every stage of the process to overcome the problem, because again, it's really a function of providing opportunities to everybody. And the other conclusion is, if these opportunities are provided, then we as a community need to ensure that we maximize every opportunity that we can to invest in ourselves and create value in the economy, and then we will be able to have a place in corporate America. So again, kind of thinking about how did I get here? Well, obviously starts off like most of us, having great parents, and my mother and my grandmother were both teachers, so we did value education, and that was a key focus in our family. So clearly did well in school. Always had the support from my parents. But the one thing that always stands out in my mind in terms of the first experience in my life where I could have potentially been held back was in my sixth grade math class, where I had straight A's all year, and looking back, math and the school in general was pretty easy for me, and I continued to excel. And at the end of the year, my mother, who was a teacher who who knew the system and knew how to navigate it and how to maximize my education, she recommended to my teacher at the time, well, Fred should be put in the advanced math class. And my math teacher was strongly opposed to it and said, I don't think he's going to do well. It's a bad idea, and I think he's better off kind of going the normal path. And my mother was saying, well, he has 100 averages every 6 weeks, and he never studies. So I don't see why, what the issue is. And she was, again, very much against it. And, my mother said, well, let him at least try, give him a chance to fail. And I will deal with that as a parent. And again, she said, no. Like, I think I'm not going to recommend him for the advanced math. And so again, my mother, because she was a teacher in that same school district, she knew that she could recommend me take a math test to get around this recommendation, which I did. So I took the test. I scored very high, and I was fortunate enough to not only get into the advanced math class, but then get into an even more advanced math class in 8th grade. And what's interesting about that story is a good friend of mine who was a Harvard law grad and very successful in his career. He has the exact same story in 6th grade, and we both have talked about how that particular event in our lives was the deciding factor in terms of going down path A versus path B. And so again, after going through that experience, I continued to excel in high school. I continued to do well in not just math, but all of my classes. But the other thing that I also focused on quite heavily was sports. I played football and I ran track. And so, I think our society typically praises, Black boys for sports, but not so much, for academics. But the good thing about getting that praise was that's where I learned to have, a high level of confidence in myself. Some consider it arrogance or whatever you want to call it, but I did have, a high self-esteem, obviously because I was doing good in school, but also because I was doing good in sports. And so, I'll touch on that confidence point as we continue to go through the process, but I think that was also very critical in terms of how did I get to where I'm at? So obviously, again, did well in high school, went to college, again, focused more primarily on track, with kind of school being kind of, I did well in school, but it wasn't my focus. My main focus was sports. I wanted to, go to the Olympics and, be a famous track athlete. It wasn't until I met my girlfriend, now wife at the time, now wife, and my father-in-law said, well, you're doing really good in school. You should think about, getting an MBA or going to law school. And I said, I'll think about it, but that's not really my focus. But, my future father-in-law, he wants to see, a plan B in my mind. And so I considered it. And so, again, I had very high GPA in college. All of the right statistics. So I said, I'll try law school. And so, the key thing if I think about me applying to law school, I without question recognize that I was accepted. Well, obviously accepted, but more so I was a diverse candidate. So they were trying to increase diversity. That's number one. Number two, I remember calling my mother and telling her that, I'm going to law school. And she says, well, that's great, but I'm not paying for that. I've already done my part in terms of, giving you access to an education. So essentially what that meant was I didn't have any money to pay for law school. And so fortunately at SMU School of Law, they had a minority scholarship that was a full ride, and I was able to receive that. And then, that's what gave me the access to going to go to law school. Did well in law school, finished top 10%, had a very positive experience at SMU. I guess being in Dallas, it was probably the first time that I did kind of experience some clear differences in treatment, but for the most part on the campus, you have a blind grading system. So if you work hard, you study hard, you're gonna do well. And so that's what I did, and I was able to again finish top of the class. So I think now transitioning from law school to my first position in corporate America at Skadden Arps. And again, without question, I was a diversity hire. If you were top of your class at SMU and, African American, you pretty much had complete access to any, top, law firm job or internship. But again, I don't deny the fact that clearly it was more of a we need to hire more diverse candidates, and so Fred is meets that mark. So let's bring him in for an internship. So I interned at Skadden. Ultimately got a full-time position, and then I start in my career at Skadden. And on day one, I remember being just terrified because this was really the first time that I had been exposed to what we call corporate America. I remember having to being concerned about my attire, all of these things that I didn't grow up seeing. And so, and just little things like how do I fit in? Do I belong? Am I am I diverse hire? Things like that. But those things, as we all do, we have to kind of deal with those questions that we have in our minds, and just go to work and do the best we can. And so, a couple of things I thought about Skadden in preparation for this for this engagement. I remember a couple of things. They had a very systematic way of saying, if you do X, you will succeed. In other words, in your second year, you should know these things. In your fifth year, you should know how to do these things. I remember printing that out and having that on my desk, ensuring that I got the right skills based off of kind of where I was at in every point in my career. And I mention that because as I left law school, there was I knew a lot of other Black lawyers, particularly Black males, because we were all friends. I went to law firms in Dallas, Houston, New York, whatever the case may be. And I didn't really get the impression that they had the same level of transparency associated with how do they succeed in a law firm. And I think that's important because if this is the first time that you've been exposed to this world and you don't know anything about how to succeed, it's going to be scary. It's going to be challenging. Your chances of success are not going to be as high. And so that's when you start to have to deal with what I call these unspoken rules, that if you've grown up in this world, or you've seen your parents grow up in this world, you can navigate much easier. But if you're like myself, who've never seen it, it just becomes very intimidating. But again, there were some things in place at Skadden that I was able to just focus on and say, as long as I do these things and keep getting good in my craft, then I should be fine. The second thing that happened at Skadden was I had a really good mentor who everybody in my family knows his name because I consistently give him credit for tremendous amounts of help. Christian Callens. He when I was a first year, and I think the first that I worked on was with Christian, and I think he saw something in me for whatever, and I don't know what it was, but he saw something in me that said, okay, look, this guy is going to work hard. He's going to make my life easier because he's going to make me look good. And I'm going to teach him how to be a lawyer. Because at the end of the day, when as we all know, as lawyers, you never know law school doesn't teach you how to be a lawyer. So we have to depend on someone saying, we're going to invest the time and energy into this person to show him what he needs to be successful, what he needs to do to be successful. And that's what he did. And so we worked together for 6, almost 7 years. And he clearly, it wasn't until I left Skadden that I really appreciated, one, what he did for my career, but also the fact that you do have to be taught these things, and it's not going to come, just by being in the room. And so, you know, I had a you know, very positive experience at Skadden, learned a lot. And at that point, I was trained to know how to be, at least in my opinion, a good lawyer. The one interesting thing about my last year at Skadden was that they started a organization, or kind of an initiative, to focus on kind of retaining and promoting Black lawyers within Skadden. And so this was, again, my last year, and I was kind of already considering, you know, other opportunities. But what was interesting about that was at this event, they basically admitted or acknowledged that there's probably some unspoken rules about partnership, that unless you have you know, clear access to the information, you're just not going to know. And if you don't have that information, you're not going to, you're going to be less likely to be become partner, versus the person who can get pulled to the side and say, hey, look, this is the real process of how to get to that position. And so what was interesting about that event was, it was the acknowledgement that if you don't know the unspoken rules to be successful, the chances of you getting to that point are going to, you know, they're not going to be as high. And so, you know, I left Skadden literally like a month after that event, because I already had a job opportunity, which I'll get to in a moment, at Brookfield. But I have seen over the years, incidentally, a lot more, you know, Black partners in Skadden, because I'm sure that initiative kind of kicked off something that helped people have, you know, access to that information. And so moving now to my time at Brookfield, which is where I'm at today, you know, I'm obviously at this point trained, and so like I've kind of, you know, passed the barrier of, you know, not having someone invest in my career. Now I know what I'm doing. So I get to Brookfield, and you know, what's interesting about Brookfield is it's a Canadian-based firm. And so what does that mean? Well, I think if you think about the historical dynamics in the U.S., particularly like the, you know, history of you know, African Americans in our society, there's clearly the unconscious biases. There's clearly you know, the systemic racism that we've talked about. I'm sure you talked about in other speaking series. That is, we know what that is, right? But at Brookfield, it took me about a year to realize that you know, they didn't see me the same way that I had kind of witnessed, you know, corporate America, you know, in corporate America see me. And you know, part of it was funny because I didn't. Sometimes they would ask me to do things and say, Fred, we need you to go negotiate this, you know, this transaction. And I would second guess myself, because I'm like, am I ready to do that? I've never done it before. So, you know, I'm not sure if I'm capable, but I just obviously went and did it and did a good job. But it took me a while to recognize that they didn't see me as the Black guy in the company. They just saw me as a competent lawyer, and we need you to go do X, Y, and Z. And so, again, the fact that they didn't have kind of this, you know, lens that I was used to seeing has made a tremendous, you know, impact in my career at Brookfield. I mean, they one thing they do is they never hold back in giving me opportunities. They call them stretch roles, where they say, hey, Fred, just, you know, go do this, join this committee, go talk to these investors, whatever the case may be. And what I have seen in the last 5 years at Brookfield is that has also enhanced my own personal self, awareness of myself and my own value. So now I feel more comfortable doing these things, whereas I don't know if that would have been the case had I not been put into this environment where they saw me, you know, essentially like every other person. And so, you know, again, that's how I got to where I'm at today. And so, like, if you think about, you know, all of the things that had to happen to get to where I'm at today, you know, you had to, you know, my mother had to, you know, get around the system in terms of getting me into like another path academically. You know, I had to have like a very unique experience in sports and gain confidence in myself, but also had to have someone tell me, you know, you need to take advantage of your academic success, not just focus on sports. You know, I had a diversity scholarship, and I'm sure again I was selected to come to SMU to increase the numbers of African Americans. I'm quite sure that I was a diverse hire at Skadden, and I was fortunate enough to have good mentorship at Skadden, and then fortunate enough to be go to Brookfield, and also be able to see that I can do the work and I do belong, and get that confidence in myself as well. And so look, I think that the question in terms of like being a part of the solution is, if you think about all would have to happen, it should not be that difficult for someone who is clearly qualified to get to where I'm at today. It's clearly in my opinion, divine intervention that I got to where I'm at today. But if you think about kind of what needed to happen, I think that's part of the problem, or it is the problem. And then we need to think about like, how do we find solutions to that particular issue? And so, look, I think if I have to think about it, it's really kind of what should corporate America or businesses do, and then what should we do as African Americans who are trying to navigate this environment. In terms of businesses, I think, kind of looking back at my own experience, we need to provide exposure to middle school, high school kids, that these types of roles, being a lawyer, being in asset management, these things exist. They're very lucrative. They are, and if you work hard, you can make it and be very successful. I'm also a strong believer in, as I said, direct select programs where you have to be targeting, and trying to increase diversity. And I recognize that that's a bit of a, people have opinions on that particular issue, but at the end of the day, I think that I have not personally seen people make it in this environment unless they are specifically targeted and there's an objective desire to increase diversity. I think once you have identified talent and a diverse person, you need to have, again, a systematic process that ensures that once they get to their position, they do have an opportunity to succeed. Everyone has to know the rules in terms of what it takes to objectively move up in your company. The company has to be bound by those rules, because again, we don't really, at least I don't think of this as handouts, but it's just really having a level playing field where everyone can compete. And I'm willing to bet on myself, and I'm sure others are also willing to bet on themselves in terms of being able to compete if there's an objective standard to achieve success. I think we shouldn't have any disingenuous attempts. I mean, I'm sure we all know how there's, at least when I was coming out of law school, law firms were just trying to meet their numbers, hit their diversity numbers, and we got to hire X number of diverse candidates every year because our clients want to see that. They want to see more diversity. And so we just got to go hire people. But I think as we all know, tons of individuals who were hired to meet these numbers. But once they got to the firm, if you don't have a process where you are investing in their development and trying to retain them and promote them, then it's clear when it's disingenuous, and that's just not a successful way to try to be a part of the solution. The last thing I'd say is, and this kind of goes back to the whole transparent process, is I think every organization needs to be kind of thinking themselves as a learning organization where you should provide equal access to information in terms of success, again, in a law firm, how do you get the right training to, be a good M&A lawyer? Or how do you get the right training to be a good negotiator? But these are things that you shouldn't hide that information, because again, that adds to the issue of not being able to make it a level playing field. And in terms of what should individuals do, which in some ways I kind of place more responsibility on us who want us to get these opportunities, because the worst thing you want to happen is you get the opportunity and you don't maximize it, and that obviously hurts yourself, but it also hurts the all other diverse candidates, because then there's an argument that says, well, see, that's why he or she, or that's why they don't excel, because they're not qualified. And so we have a responsibility to ourselves and to our community to make sure that if we get the opportunity, we have to maximize it as much as possible. I think the one thing that's required to do that, and again, going back to kind of how I learned about having a good self-esteem and confidence, is you're going to find yourself in situations where you're the only one encouraging yourself, and you're the only one that's believing in yourself. And I think that's probably the toughest part about the journey, is you're going to feel, whether it's true or not, you're going to feel like you don't belong. They don't think you're going to succeed. I shouldn't be here. That kind of stuff. But I think having the ability to consistently encourage yourself and believe in yourself is extremely important, because you're gonna feel these when you're the only Black person in the room. These emotions are gonna naturally be created. And the last thing that I'd say is you should also welcome and embrace being held to a higher standard. While one thing that I've been told by people that I speak to about this lot is, I will always have to prove myself before getting the opportunity, where others may be given an opportunity to prove themselves. And so what does that mean? Well, if I have seen in situations that you're going to be told why you're not, why you didn't get this promotion, why you didn't get this put on this deal team. And that is frustrating, because a lot of times these whys are subjective, and so it's really hard to kind of figure out, is do I really have this issue? Am I do I really not have this skill set, or is it more kind of some subjective bias that you just assume I don't have the skill set? But I think what I've been able to do over the years is, even when someone tells me that I don't have, say there's 10 boxes I need to check to get to the next stage in my career. If someone tells me I don't have 2 of them, and I cannot move on until I get those 2, I just try to get those 2, even if I don't think that it's fair, or even if I think that I may already have those skills. I don't let that frustration prevent me from continuing to try to better myself. And what I have found is, over time, if you continue to prove yourself, when people tell you that you don't meet a certain standard, you will ultimately get better, because you're going to continue to invest in yourself, even when it may not be warranted. And so over time, you will become really good at what you do, because you're continuing to invest in yourself. And so I think, if you do that over time, what will happen is you will understand your value, and obviously the organization that you are a part of will also understand your value. And at some point, if you remain constructive and continue to check all these boxes, it will pay off, and then you will become undeniable. At that point, you can influence change, and you can kind of have the leverage in your career that you can go help others behind you, and then also be a part of the solution in that regard. So again, I think as I said, I tried to kind of go through my my story and figure out how, how do I think these issues can be addressed. Obviously, these issues are not easy to fix. It's going to take generations, but I think if we can kind of have a joint, you know, commitment from a corporate America perspective, as well as the Black community, then I think we can, over time, help try to solve these issues. So with that, look, I'm happy to answer any questions, and I actually welcome questions, because I think a lot of times, these discussions are much more meaningful when, there's personal issues that people want to discuss, and I'm happy to kind of give my thoughts and to the extent helpful.
Thank you, Fred, for your comments and sharing your story with us about your experience. One question that we have is, a lot of what you talked about suggests some concerns around imposter syndrome, right? And feeling like even though you're in a place, you don't belong in that place. How has that played out, you think, in your experience, and as it relates particularly to how systematic racism has impacted your experience?
Yeah, look, I think that that's probably the biggest barrier that I've had to deal with personally. Again, I started off, and I think about where my head was at in high school, college, and law school. And, as my wife will tell you, I had a very high opinion of myself, because I had, excelled in school, I had excelled in sports, and, I went to Skadden, and I was, instantly intimidated and instantly recognized that this was a much different environment that I had just not been aware, I had not been exposed to. It was scary. I remember being, my first day at Skadden, they had like this welcome, breakfast. And I remember, grabbing the cup of coffee, my hand just shaking, terrified. You're worried about things like, how does my suit look? How do I talk, to the, in this environment? Again, do I belong? I mean, every single, like the first couple of years, every assignment that I had was a new introduction to something I'd never seen before. I remember, one of the partners walking to my office saying, "Hey, can you do this assignment? Go ahead and look at the 10K, and then we can talk in about an hour." And my first question was like, well, what is a 10K? I don't even know what a 10K is. And I don't know who to ask, because I don't want to admit that I don't know what a 10K is, because then they're gonna really know that I don't belong here. And so having that, and that probably lasted up until easily my 5th year at Skadden. But again, I think, working with, as I said, Christian Collins at Skadden, he was my security blanket. Like, I enjoyed working with him because he saw that I was at least smart and worked hard. And so he was the person that said, "Okay, Fred, go draft this or go review this." And we were close and say, "I don't know how to do that." He's like, "Yes, you do. Go draft this." He would give me very annoying comments to everything I would draft, because he wanted me to like think through the issues as opposed to him giving me the answers. And over that period of time, it allowed me to build my confidence. And of course, in year 5, you are you just know you belong at that point to some degree, because you survived the first couple of years. The Black professionals that I know that lasted, past year 2 or year 3, all had a similar experience. And it's not that many of us, but we had someone that, gave us that initial security blanket to get over that imposter syndrome, which again is very real. And even today, I've been doing this for almost 15 years, and I'm used to it now. So I know how to respond to, when you go to a negotiation and you're the only Black person in the room, and there's maybe 20 people in the room, and having the confidence to say, I'm going to speak, I'm going to have a presence in the room, and I belong here. And, I'm not just going to sit here and, watch everyone else perform. I'm here as well. But I think, in some ways, being smart is, I don't want to say easy, but that, like, if you get to that point, that's you can check that box. If you get to that point, you can check the box because you're going to work hard. It's the psychological dynamics of, reminding yourself, that you belong and you can excel just like anybody else.
Thank you, Fred. As a African-American male who is in a intensely competitive profession, and who is working out issues of self-actualization in the profession, how has the recent upheaval impacted you? And I know that you have children, and impacted you, the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and how has that impacted your dynamic in the workplace and personally?
Well, I think maybe starting with personally first. I mean, obviously, my mother had to tell me certain things growing up. Don't do this, be careful, in these environments because, you could get killed or whatever. I remember when Trayvon Martin was murdered, my mother calling me and pretty emotional about it, but she, I'm well into my 30s, right? Have a career, and remember my mother calling me and saying, like, make sure you don't wear any hoods, any hoodies, when you're out, in Houston. I'm like, well, I'm not. No, I'm gonna wear whatever I want to wear. But my point is, my mother, even as a grown man, she still had that that innate desire to make sure I'm safe. And she told me something that is not fair that you have to tell even your grown son, but she felt needed, that they need to do that. I've never really assumed that I would not have to have that same conversation with, my 7-year-old son, Christian, and obviously my 12-year-old daughter. But it just reinforced that that dynamic that I do have to have these conversations with him. I think professionally, what it has also told me is I have to train Christian, my son, and my daughter Jocelyn, that when they go to professional environment, they also have to learn the unspoken rules that my mother told me, that we all have heard. You have to work twice as hard. You have to, take advantage of every opportunity. All those things. You're going to be the only one in the room. I still have to. I know I still have to tell my children those same lessons, and it's unfortunate, but I would not be a responsible parent if I didn't. And maybe, when my children are that age, they can say, Dad, like, that was back in your day. Things are much better now, which I hope that's the case. But I clearly still feel the need to tell, my children, this is how you handle yourself when you're the only person in the room. Now, at least for them, I can give a personal account of how to do it. Whereas for a lot of us, we don't have that roadmap. And so fortunately for my children, I like to think that I can help them navigate these issues. And God willing, they won't have to worry about these issues as much as I've had to worry about them. But, I think, the recent events have reminded me that I do got to train my children to be able to navigate these issues. The last thing I'd say is professionally, I am hopeful because my company and most other companies in the United States have kind of become much more aware of the issue. My company recently launched a diversity committee effectively, where we're going to have a direct, focus on this issue and have a systematic way of trying to address it. And I have the privilege of being on that committee. I'm co-chairing it with another with the woman out of New York who, if you listen to her story, it's the exact same story. Like she had, the very, direct diversity initiatives that helped her get to where she's at. And so my company, we are very focused on trying to solve these issues to the extent that, or at least playing our part in solving the issues. And some of my other friends, who are also in similar in the same industry that I'm in, they also are all having the same conversation. So I do think that as unfortunate and as tragic as these events that have occurred are, I do think that we are have an opportunity to use these events to start to have a real change in corporate America.
So another question for you is, we've talked a little bit about some of the people who were instrumental in your life, and what advice would you give to allies who are concerned about the trajectory or lack thereof of professionals of color in the workplace? And what are some of the key tips for mentoring college students and others who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color?
I think the first thing I'd say is assuming, you obviously have to assume that people's heart is in the right place. So assuming your heart's in the right place and you want to have at a minimum an equal opportunity. The first thing is, how do you identify, how would you identify talent that you think is worthy of investing in? And so again, I think, you obviously can't use kind of our traditional value system, because sometimes that traditional value system doesn't, I don't meet the criteria in a lot of traditional values. I didn't go to all the right schools. I didn't, have the right attire, on day one at the law firm, things like that. The first question is, if you want to be an ally, you need to figure out how are you truly identifying talent. I think that the key thing is, if you can see that this particular person has maximized whatever opportunities that they've had, and they work hard and they're eager to learn and they have a passion for learning, then clearly that is someone that you should say, look, I'm going to help this person get the skills that they need to have a chance of being successful. I think, in addition to that, again, I think it does need to be, so that's kind of on the individual level, but I think at the corporate level, there needs to be a collective system that says, we're going to make sure that if we thought this person was worthy to be hired, we're going to make sure that they get everything that they need to be successful here. We're going to check in with these people. We're going to make sure they have, not just mentors, but sponsors, which is, a sponsor is someone who can, rather than a mentor who just says, here's kind of, how, how you, mentors are more of, hey, just seeing how everything's going, make sure you're happy, those kind of things. That's kind of easy. And those can be kind of both organic or inorganic. But sponsors are somebody that says, okay, we've identified a really good talent. We need to make sure that they know how to succeed in this organization and have they know the spoken rules and the unspoken rules. But it has to be systematic. It has to be, it's not going to happen passively. And so I think as an organization, you do have to say, we're going to try. We're going to make sure that we're going to bring in good talent. We're going to make sure that they're learning, and and do the best we can to make sure that they're successful.
Thank you, Fred. So another question that has come from the Q&A is, and the person is curious about the ethnic background of the coworker that was thoughtful and helpful to you.
Oh, look, I mean, he is white male, which is interesting because as we talk about our relationship, there's really no like clear reason why we just connected. It was just purely a true symbiotic relationship. It was, he said, this guy's smart, he's gonna work hard, seems to be a nice guy, and I thought he was a nice guy as well. And we just clicked, and I think we both try to invest in each other, in each way that we can, which is a good point to make, because when, given where we are from a diversity perspective, the likelihood of someone like myself being in an organization when a new person comes in is very unlikely. And so the only people that are going to be in a position to provide access to that information is going to be someone that doesn't look like them, but looks, be white, male, or female. And so that's just the reality of the situation. Like I think we think about one of the key problems that have led to diversity is just, we don't have the information. We don't have the information around getting into the right schools. You don't have the information around getting into the right programs, internships. Once we get to the law firms, we don't have the information to how to be successful. And so someone has to give us that information. Now, my children, thank God that they're going to have someone who can tell them how to do this. And, it's funny because my wife, like her passion is ensuring that Black children have this access from the standpoint of middle school kids and high school kids. How do you get into the right, college prep courses? Once you go to college, how do you get, we just didn't have this information. And so, unfortunately, we have to be exposed to it. And which means it's going to have to be, a white male or female that says, I'm going to give this person access. I mean, I'm a big believer in, they need, like the problem is we don't have access to the unspoken rule book that says, okay, this is how you make it, in these environments. But if you give us access, I'm willing to bet that we will be just as successful as any other group. As people say, our talent is equally distributed amongst all races, but opportunities are not equally distributed. So I'm a firm believer in, a true competitive environment. We will clearly succeed relative to any other group.
Thank you, Fred. So another question is, so you spoke earlier about encouraging yourself, and sometimes you're the only person who encourages yourself. So how do you, or what advice do you have for people of color encouraging themselves in spaces where they're intimidated, not just at work, but also in personal situations and educational settings? What advice would you give?
The first thing that I would say is, the advice that I'm giving is not going to mean that you will not feel insecure, because you will. And that, I mean, I done very well. I still feel insecurities all the time. I do, personally, I do a lot of praying and a lot of, not necessarily depending on myself, but, in my faith, which, in my opinion is almost like a prerequisite. But I think it's, once I do that, and once I go into these situations that are clearly intimidating, I just go. And I just go and I go in there and I do the best I can. I remember going to a negotiation back in February, and I mean, this is pre all of the most recent events. And, you know, it was probably 20, you know, it's probably 20 or so people in the room. And I was the only Black person in the room, and there was no women in the room. And so it was wow, like this is, you know, it happens all the time, if not every time. But in this particular situation, it was pretty stark, just kind of the fact that I was the only one in there. And I, you know, and obviously there is that part of, you know, being intimidated, and it kind of you know, staring you in the face. But, you know, you just go in there, and I've learned to kind of work through those insecurities. And when I have something to say, I just say it. And if I'm negotiating against somebody, I just, you know, you almost have to just perform. And over time, you feel safer kind of working through those insecurities, which again, if you think about, okay, how have I been able to get to that point? One, I had to be let in the room, which, you know, I wasn't let into the room until I went to Brookfield, where they were saying, Fred, we need you to come to this negotiation. And I was terrified. I don't know I don't know, what does that even look like? Like, what does a negotiation or, you know, a large meeting look like? You know, and I went and I said, this isn't that bad. And then, you know, I'm looking to, you know, in this case, you know, a white male who's, you know, again, Canadian, but, you know, in his late 40s, early 50s, you know, when they say something, then he turns to me and says, Fred, like, what should we say? What's your opinion on what they just said? And then I said, well, this is my opinion. Then I say it. And then the other side says, okay, yeah, we get that. And then it's like, wow, my opinion actually wasn't that bad. And if you do that over 5 years, you realize that your opinions are actually pretty good. And, you know, in your positions, and then you become very comfortable in being in those environments. But the thing is, I would have never gained that confidence if I was never let into the room. And the people who let me into the room, again, I've never personally been in an environment where people are saying, Fred, like, go get them. Like, you're gonna handle this situation. And I'm used to saying, well, you know, Black people don't do that. Like, or I'm not used to Black people doing that. And it's just not in their psyche, because I think it's the historical, they don't have that historical dynamic that is present in the US.
Well, Fred, I for one appreciate your transparency and your honesty, because I think most people reading your bio and looking at you and your success would think that these are not issues that you are dealing with, these issues of confidence and of assertiveness and of continuing to develop and access to development in your profession. And so this is going to be our last question, and I'm going to try to pull two questions together. So the question is, many of the additional efforts you've described to assist Black and Indigenous people of color law students and attorneys succeed sound like information that our white counterparts do for non-Black and Indigenous people of color students and attorneys all the time unofficially. How do we call out those firms and employers about not providing this access and making it clearly available for all? Is it a double standard that intentionally excludes people of color from opportunities and success while placing the burden on us to fix the issues they're creating? And then the other side of the question is, do Black people who end up being the only people in the world, or do people in the room rather, or do people of color generally who end up being the only people in the room have the obligation to call out, and do they have the obligation to reach back?
So maybe taking the second question first. I mean, without question, you do have an obligation to reach back. If you think about, again, I now have the playbook, right? And so I need to do everything that I can to give the playbook to people behind me, but also to give that playbook, or to recommend that, you know, institutions get that playbook get disseminated amongst all their employees. You know, in terms of calling out organizations, I think that, one of the things that has helped me in my career is to always be constructive. And maybe to unpack that, if you don't have any leverage in an organization, you calling them out is not going to change anything. I like to believe that there's kind of there's the moral obligation to fix diversity or increase diversity, but more importantly, there is the business case around increasing diversity. And I always say that the moral obligation to increase diversity is a trend, and it will come and go. When I was in law school in 2005 to 2007, the economy was booming, and there was this mass push to increase diversity in law firms. When the great financial crisis hit, those initiatives were not. No one will admit this, but they clearly were not a focus, because it was about surviving, the Great Recession. And so then there became, two things. The Black attorneys that were hired were the first to be let go. And then and this was probably 2 years into my career. And you said, well, why were they the first to go? Well, it's because you can make an objective statement that said that if we have to keep certain people, these are the people that we have to keep. Well, the people that they had to keep were the ones that had someone invested in their career in those first 2 years. So they had skills, and they were kind of, worthy to be saved, notwithstanding the economy. And so my point is, the moral obligation to fix diversity, it's going to come and go. And so then you say, okay, well, how do you make this sustainable? And this is where I go back to leverage. Like, if you call somebody out, if you call an institution out when you're a second-year lawyer, third-year lawyer, you're not going to change anything, because there's really no motivating force to change. And so my recommendation is, you have to invest in yourself. You have to spend a significant amount of time investing in your career, so you can get to the point where you can call somebody out. But even then, you have to be constructive. Like, when I speak to folks in my organization, it's always a function of, this is good for business. Diversity is good for business. Our investors want this. If you increase diversity, it's going to give you new diversity of thought, all of these things. So I do think you need to call people out per se, or kind of make it, you need to make it known that this needs to be fixed, but you also have to have the self-awareness to know when to do it. And I'm at the point in my career where I can say, hey, if you want to increase diversity, I have some perspectives that can assist. By the way, I know that our investors are requiring it, just like law firms, their clients, i.e. like myself, are requiring it. And so that's where the leverage comes in. I've seen people try to call it out early in their career, and it just doesn't go over too well. I think it's just more about, you have to spend the time to create value in yourself. And that's how you get to the point where you can make a change, when at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Fred. So our time is up. I don't know if you had any final remarks that you wanted to make about this, or if you are you want to leave it right there.
No, again, thanks for the opportunity. Obviously these problems are not going to be solved overnight, but I am hopeful, and based off of the current climate and things that I've seen both in my organization at Brookfield and just across the board, I do think that, you know, our heart is in the right place, or kind of collective heart is in the right place. I think that what we need to do during this environment is establish the business case, because I think the business case for diversity will be sustainable. And then I think, you know, for the allies out there, people who want to be allies, you know, I do thank you, because your assistance will create generational impacts. Again, you know, the things that I had to navigate, I'm trying my best, and I think I have the means now to help my children either not have to navigate them, or they have the information to navigate them. So I think we should all just be mindful of the role that we play, and recognize that, you know, the allies are making you know, a tremendous investment in their own companies, because again, I think, you know, diversity is going to help all businesses, because you're going to invest in the right people, which every manager, that's their responsibility, is to invest in the right talent. But I do think it will have a meaningful impact in our society. And so I am, you know, encouraged by the what seems to be a much more focus on these issues currently.
Well, we want to thank everybody for joining us today. We've appreciated that you shared your time with us. We hope this has been a good experience for you.